Sarah Martinez had always been invisible in the sprawling halls of the Pentagon. At 28, she worked as a communications analyst in one of the many basement offices where classified information flowed like water through carefully monitored channels. Her days were predictable routines of intercepting radio transmissions, analyzing encrypted messages, and filing reports that disappeared into the vast military bureaucracy. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Sarah arrived at her desk at 0600 hours, her security badge swinging from the lanyard around her neck as she navigated through the maze of corridors. The basement level hummed with the constant white noise of servers and air conditioning units working overtime to keep the sensitive equipment cool. Her supervisor, Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, barely acknowledged her presence as she settled into her workstation. Sarah was used to this treatment. In a world dominated by decorated officers and seasoned veterans, a civilian contractor with a communications degree from a small college in Ohio hardly registered on anyone's radar. The first few hours passed in their usual rhythm. Sarah monitored the designated frequencies, her trained ear picking up the subtle changes in transmission patterns that might indicate enemy activity. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect irregularities in radio chatter, a skill that had earned her quiet recognition among her immediate colleagues, but remained largely unknown to the upper echelons of command. Around 0930 hours, Sarah decided to take her first coffee break of the day. The break room was a sterile space with fluorescent lighting that buzzed slightly and a coffee machine that had seen better days. She was alone, which was how she preferred it. The machine gurgled and hissed as it dispensed the dark liquid into her ceramic mug, a personal touch in an otherwise impersonal environment. As the coffee streamed into her cup, Sarah's mind wandered to the conversation she'd had with her mother the night before. Her family still didn't quite understand what she did for a living. "Something with computers and radios," was how she usually explained it, keeping the classified details to herself. Her mother worried constantly about Sarah working in such a serious environment, especially after the recent terrorist attacks that had put everyone on edge. The coffee machine finished its cycle with a final sputter, and Sarah was about to add cream when the intercom crackled to life. This wasn't unusual. Announcements were made throughout the day, but something about the tone made her pause. The voice that emerged was crisp, authoritative, and unmistakably that of Admiral Richardson, one of the highest-ranking officials in the building. "Would communications analyst Sarah Martinez please report to Conference Room Alpha immediately?" Sarah's hand froze halfway to the cream dispenser. Her call sign, her real name, spoken by an admiral over the general intercom system. In her 3 years at the Pentagon, she had never heard a civilian contractor's name announced in this manner. Military protocol dictated that such announcements were reserved for urgent matters involving senior personnel. The break room suddenly felt smaller. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter, and the coffee in her hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Conference Room Alpha was on the 5th floor, deep in the heart of the Pentagon's most secure section. Sarah had never been there, had never even been on that floor. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Had she made an error in one of her reports? Had she accidentally intercepted something she shouldn't have? The protocol for handling classified information was strict, and violations could end careers or worse. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. The ceramic clinked against the counter, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the silence that had fallen over the break room. She realized she was holding her breath and forced herself to exhale slowly. The walk to Conference Room Alpha felt like a journey through a different building entirely. As Sarah rode the elevator up from the basement levels, she passed floors she had only heard about in whispered conversations. Each floor required a higher security clearance, and by the time she reached the 5th floor, she was in territory reserved for the most senior officials. The hallways here were different, too. The industrial carpeting of the lower levels gave way to polished floors and wood paneling. Portraits of distinguished military leaders lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow her as she walked. The very air felt heavier, charged with the weight of decisions that shaped national security. Sarah found Conference Room Alpha after consulting a discreet directory near the elevator. Her security badge, which had granted her access to the building's lower levels without question for 3 years, suddenly felt inadequate. She half expected to be stopped by security, to be told there had been some mistake, that civilian contractors weren't allowed in this section. But the electronic lock on the conference room door beeped green when she swiped her badge, and the heavy door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. Sarah stepped into a room that seemed to exist in a different world from the utilitarian spaces she knew. The conference room was impressive in its understated elegance. A massive oval table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that looked like they cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. The walls were lined with monitors and displays showing various military communications networks and global positioning systems. At the far end of the room, a bank of windows offered a view of the Potomac River, though Sarah barely registered the scenery. What captured her attention immediately were the people already seated around the table. Admiral Richardson sat at the head, his uniform bearing ribbons and decorations that represented decades of distinguished service. To his right sat General Morrison, whom Sarah recognized from briefings she had watched on the internal news feed. There were at least 6 other senior officers present, their collective rank representing more military authority than Sarah had ever been in the presence of. The room fell completely silent as Sarah entered. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence, every movement ceased, and all eyes turned to her. The weight of their collective gaze felt physical, pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Sarah had never felt more aware of her civilian status, her youth, her relative insignificance in the grand scheme of military hierarchy. Admiral Richardson looked at her directly, his steel-gray eyes taking in her appearance with the practiced assessment of a career military officer. When he spoke, his voice carried the same authority that had echoed through the intercom system moments before. "Ms. Martinez," he said, and even though she had heard him say her name over the announcement system, hearing it spoken directly to her in this room felt surreal. "Please take a seat." Sarah moved toward the table on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The leather chair was as comfortable as it looked, but she perched on the edge, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the building's daily operations. She waited, acutely aware that whatever had brought her to this room was about to fundamentally change her life. The coffee she had been pouring seemed like something from another lifetime, a simple moment of routine that had preceded whatever revelation was about to unfold. Admiral Richardson leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but not unkind. When he finally spoke, his words would set in motion a chain of events that would test everything Sarah thought she knew about herself, her abilities, and her place in the complex world of national security. Admiral Richardson's eyes never left Sarah's face as he began to speak. His voice was measured, each word carefully chosen, as if he were defusing a bomb rather than conducting a briefing. "Ms. Martinez, 3 weeks ago, you filed a routine analysis report regarding unusual transmission patterns you detected on the overseas frequency bands. Report number Delta 77 Alpha. Do you remember this report?" Sarah's mind immediately went to work, sorting through the dozens of reports she had filed in recent weeks. The reference number triggered her memory like a key turning in a lock. She had noticed something odd in the radio chatter coming from a region in Eastern Europe, patterns that didn't match the typical military communications protocols she was familiar with. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice sounding smaller than she intended in the vast room. "I detected transmission bursts that didn't follow standard military encryption patterns. The timing intervals were irregular, and the frequency hopping seemed too sophisticated for the equipment typically used in that region." General Morrison leaned forward, his weathered face showing interest. "What did you conclude in your analysis?" Sarah felt the weight of their attention intensify. This was clearly more than a routine follow-up on a filed report. "I recommended further investigation, sir. The patterns suggested the use of advanced communication technology that didn't match the known capabilities of local military forces. I noted it could indicate the presence of foreign technical advisors or more sophisticated equipment than previously assessed." A subtle exchange of glances passed between the senior officers around the table. Admiral Richardson pulled a thick folder from the stack of papers in front of him and opened it carefully. Sarah could see multiple official seals and classification stamps on the documents inside. "Ms. Martinez," the Admiral continued, "your analysis was forwarded up the chain of command and eventually reached the desk of the Director of National Intelligence. Based on your recommendations, a joint CIA-NSA investigation was initiated. That investigation has revealed something that changes our understanding of the entire regional conflict." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. She had written hundreds of similar reports over her 3 years in the position. Most disappeared into the vast intelligence apparatus without any feedback reaching her level. To learn that one of her routine analyses had triggered a major investigation was both thrilling and terrifying. Colonel Hayes, whom Sarah now recognized as being from the Defense Intelligence Agency, opened his own folder. "The transmission patterns you identified were indeed anomalous. Our field agents confirmed that a previously unknown foreign intelligence operation was using that region as a testing ground for next-generation communication technology. Technology that could potentially compromise our own communication security if it fell into the wrong hands." The room seemed to grow even quieter, if that were possible. Sarah realized she was gripping the arms of her leather chair and forced herself to relax her hands. Admiral Richardson continued, "The investigation led to the discovery of a network that we had been trying to penetrate for over 2 years. Your analysis provided the first concrete evidence of their operational patterns. Based on the intelligence gathered from your initial report, a joint task force was able to disrupt a major operation that could have had significant implications for national security." Sarah felt a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. Her routine morning work, the kind of analysis she performed dozens of times each month, had somehow contributed to a major intelligence victory. But she sensed there was more to this story, something that explained why she was sitting in this room with the highest-ranking officials she had ever encountered. General Morrison pulled out what appeared to be a personnel file. Sarah recognized her own photograph clipped to the corner of the thick folder. "Ms. Martinez, your background check when you were hired showed exemplary academic performance and strong technical skills, but there are some gaps in your file that we need to address." Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face because Admiral Richardson raised a hand in a gesture that seemed intended to reassure her. "You're not in trouble, Ms. Martinez. Quite the opposite. But we need to discuss some information that you may not be aware of regarding your own background." Colonel Hayes opened another document and began reading from it. Sarah Elizabeth Martinez, born March 12, 1995 in Akron, Ohio. Father, Miguel Martinez, worked as an electrical engineer for General Electric. Mother, Patricia Sullivan Martinez, high school mathematics teacher. You attended Kent State University, graduated magna cum laude with a degree in communications and electronic engineering. Sarah nodded along with the familiar details of her own life, wondering where this was leading. Your father's personnel file at General Electric indicates that he worked on several classified defense contracts during the 1980s and 1990s, communication systems, radar technology, and signal processing equipment. Colonel Hayes paused and looked directly at Sarah. What he didn't tell his family was that he also worked as a consultant for the National Security Agency for over 15 years. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her father had died in a car accident when she was 16, and her memories of him were filled with his gentle manner, his love of amateur radio, and the hours he had spent teaching her about electronics and communication theory. The idea that he had worked for the NSA seemed impossible. "That's not possible," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father worked for GE. He was an engineer, not a spy or anything like that." Admiral Richardson leaned back in his chair, his expression sympathetic. "Your father wasn't a spy, Ms. Martinez. He was a technical consultant who helped develop some of the communication protocols and encryption methods that are still in use today. His work was so highly classified that he never spoke about it, even to his family." General Morrison added, "After his death, his NSA file was sealed. Your mother was never told about his classified work, and there was no reason to inform you when you applied for your current position. Your security clearance was granted based on your own background and qualifications." Sarah felt like the ground beneath her chair was shifting. Everything she thought she knew about her father was being rewritten in real time. "Why are you telling me this now?" Colonel Hayes answered. "Because your analysis of those transmission patterns didn't just demonstrate exceptional technical skill. You identified something that your father's own work helped create. The communication protocols you flagged as anomalous were based on research he contributed to 30 years ago, research that was supposedly lost when the project was terminated." The implications of this revelation began to sink in. Sarah had unknowingly identified technology that her own father had helped develop decades before she was born. Technology that was apparently being used in ways that threatened national security. Admiral Richardson pulled out another document, this one bearing multiple security classification stamps. "Ms. Martinez, we believe that someone with access to your father's old research has been using it to develop advanced communication systems for hostile foreign actors. Your ability to recognize the patterns suggests that you inherited more than just your father's technical aptitude." Sarah's mind raced through memories of her childhood. Her father teaching her about radio frequencies, showing her how different signals could be hidden within other transmissions, explaining the mathematics behind encryption methods. At the time, she had thought he was just sharing his love of electronics. Now she wondered if he had been unconsciously passing on classified knowledge. "What does this mean for me?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. General Morrison closed the personnel file and looked at her directly. "It means, Ms. Martinez, that you have a choice to make. You can return to your current position and continue your excellent work as a communications analyst, or you can accept a new assignment that would utilize your unique background and abilities in ways that could have significant impact on national security." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't the oppressive quiet of judgment or evaluation. It was the silence of opportunity, of doors opening to possibilities Sarah had never imagined. Admiral Richardson leaned forward one final time. "The choice is entirely yours, Ms. Martinez, but before you decide, there's something else you need to know. Something about why your ability to recognize those patterns is so important, and what it might mean for preventing a threat that could change the balance of power in several regions of the world." Sarah realized that her simple morning routine, her mundane job analyzing radio transmissions, had been preparing her for something much larger than she had ever imagined. The coffee she had been pouring when her name was called seemed like it belonged to a different person entirely, someone who didn't know that her father had kept secrets that were now threatening to reshape her entire future. Admiral Richardson opened the final folder in his stack, and Sarah could see satellite photographs and technical diagrams scattered among the papers. The images showed what appeared to be remote installations in mountainous terrain, with arrays of communication equipment that looked far more sophisticated than anything she had seen in her intelligence briefings. "Ms. Martinez, The transmission patterns you identified 3 weeks ago were just the beginning. Our investigation has revealed that someone has been systematically reconstructing your father's research, piece by piece, over the past 5 years. They've built installations in at least 4 countries, all designed to create a communication network that could potentially intercept, decode, and manipulate military communications across multiple allied nations. General Morrison pointed to one of the satellite photographs. These installations are using hybrid technology that combines your father's encryption methods with modern signal processing capabilities. The result is a system that can essentially make any communication look like routine commercial traffic while actually carrying military intelligence. Sarah studied the photographs, her trained eye picking out details that would have been meaningless to her just an hour earlier. Now, with the knowledge of her father's secret work, she could see the sophisticated patterns in the antenna arrangements, the deliberate positioning of the equipment arrays. "Who's behind this?" she asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Colonel Hayes pulled out what appeared to be an intelligence dossier. "We believe it's being coordinated by Dr. Viktor Kozlov, a former Soviet communications engineer who immigrated to the United States in 1991. He worked briefly as a defense contractor before disappearing in 1998. We now know he's been operating through a network of shell companies and international partnerships." Admiral Richardson added, "Dr. Kozlov worked at the same facility where your father was a consultant during the final years of the project. He would have had access to much of the same research, but apparently not all of it. The transmissions you detected suggest he's been trying to reverse engineer the missing pieces." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in Sarah's mind, but the picture they created was more complex and dangerous than she had imagined. "So he's using my father's work to create a system that could compromise our communications?" "Potentially. Yes," General Morrison replied. "But here's where it gets interesting. Your father apparently anticipated this possibility. Hidden within his research notes, which we've just recently been able to access, are what appear to be deliberate flaws in the encryption methods. Weaknesses that wouldn't be obvious unless you knew exactly what to look for." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "He built backdoors into his own work?" "More accurately, he built traps," Admiral Richardson explained. "Methods for detecting when someone was using his encryption protocols without proper authorization. The transmission patterns you identified weren't just evidence of sophisticated technology, they were essentially your father's work calling out for help." Colonel Hayes leaned forward in his chair. "Ms. Martinez, your father's notes indicate that he believed only someone with his specific knowledge, or someone he had personally trained, would be able to recognize these patterns for what they really are. He may have unconsciously been preparing you to detect the misuse of his own work." The weight of this revelation settled on Sarah's shoulders like a heavy cloak. Her father had died when she was 16, but somehow he had been trying to protect national security even from beyond the grave. And he had unknowingly chosen her as the instrument of that protection. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Sarah asked, though she sensed the answer would change her life forever. Admiral Richardson closed the folders in front of him and looked directly at her. "We're offering you the position of Senior Communications Intelligence Analyst with a joint NSA-Pentagon task force. You would work directly with our most experienced field operatives to develop methods for detecting and countering this network. Your unique background makes you the only person who can fully understand both what Dr. Kozlov is trying to accomplish and how to stop him." General Morrison added, "The position would require extensive additional training, a significant increase in security clearance, and likely extended periods of overseas deployment. It's not a decision to make lightly." Sarah thought about her quiet life in the Pentagon basement, her predictable routines, her invisible role in the vast intelligence apparatus. Then she thought about her father, working late into the night on projects he could never discuss, carrying secrets that would outlive him by decades. "If I accept this position, what guarantee do I have that I can actually make a difference?" This Dr. Kozlov has been working on this for years with teams of experts. I'm just one person who happened to notice something unusual in a radio transmission." Colonel Hayes smiled for the first time since Sarah had entered the room. "Ms. Martinez, you didn't just notice something unusual. You identified a pattern that our most sophisticated computer analysis systems had missed. You recognized your father's work even though you didn't know it existed. That's not luck or coincidence. That's inherited expertise combined with exceptional analytical ability." Admiral Richardson stood up from his chair, and the other officers followed suit. Sarah remained seated, feeling suddenly small in the large room. "I need to ask you for a decision today," the Admiral said, his tone becoming more formal. "The network we've discovered is moving quickly to expand their operations. Every day we delay gives them more opportunity to compromise additional communication systems." Sarah stood as well, her legs feeling steadier than they had when she first entered the room. She thought about her mother, who still worried about her working in such a serious environment. She thought about her father's amateur radio setup in their old basement, where he had taught her to listen for signals hidden in the static. "Admiral, if I accept this position, will I be able to prevent this technology from being used to harm people? I can't make that guarantee, Ms. Martinez, but I can tell you that without your help, we may not be able to stop it at all." Sarah looked around the room one final time, taking in the impressive displays of military authority, the classified documents, the weight of national security that seemed to permeate every surface. Then she thought about that morning's coffee, still sitting cold in the break room, waiting for someone who would never return to finish it. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and steady. The room erupted in activity as the officers began gathering their documents and making preparations for what Sarah realized would be her immediate transition to a new life. Admiral Richardson approached her personally and extended his hand. "Welcome to the task force, Senior Analyst Martinez," he said as they shook hands. "Your father would be proud." As Sarah left Conference Room Alpha an hour later, her security badge had been upgraded, her clearance level had been expanded, and her entire future had been rewritten. She walked past the portraits of distinguished military leaders with a new understanding that some of the most important battles were fought not on physical battlefields, but in the invisible realm of signals and codes and carefully hidden patterns. The break room in the basement seemed like a memory from another lifetime when she returned to collect her personal belongings. The coffee machine gurgled and hissed as it always had, but Sarah was no longer the person who had been standing there just hours earlier. Her supervisor, Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, barely looked up as she explained that she was being transferred to a different department. He simply nodded and wished her luck, never knowing that the invisible analyst he had barely acknowledged was about to embark on a mission that could determine the security of global communication systems. As Sarah packed the few personal items from her desk, she found herself thinking about patterns. The pattern of her father's life work, calling out across decades to find someone who could understand it. The pattern of her own abilities leading her to exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The pattern of choices and chances that had brought her from a basement office to the highest levels of national security in the span of a single morning. 3 months later, Sarah would be in a remote location in Eastern Europe, using skills she had inherited and abilities she had developed to dismantle a network that threatened global security. But that morning, as she walked out of the Pentagon basement for the last time, she was simply a young woman who had answered when her country called her name. The coffee she had been pouring when Admiral Richardson spoke her call sign remained unfinished, a small monument to the moment when an ordinary life transformed into something extraordinary. And in the silence that had followed that announcement, Sarah Martinez had found her true calling, hidden like a coded signal in the static of an ordinary day.